Okay, in this video we're going to go through the research methods section of the January assessments, paper 2. Okay, so let's start off with question number 13. Which of the following does reliability refer to? Of course, the correct answer is B, consistency. The most common incorrect answer was A, accuracy, but of course when we talk about accuracy we're referring to validity. So consistency is reliability. Most of you got that one correct, which is good to see. All right, question number 14, another multiple choice. Which of the following is not a role of peer review in the scientific process? To determine whether to award research funding, that is true, so that's not the case. B, to ensure only significant results are published, that is false. To ensure research has high validity and reliability is true, and to retain the integrity of psychological research is true. So this is what's incorrect about B. We don't want to just publish significant results. What happens if we do that is the file draw phenomenon, where we end up with a body of research which indicates more significance than perhaps actually exists. We want to be publishing research that also finds the null hypothesis being supported, i.e. non-significant results, because for a lot of research that is just as interesting as studies which find a significant result. For example, if a study was conducted now that found that antidepressants do not improve symptoms of depression, that is very interesting and that is worthy of further investigation. So we don't want to just ensure significant results are published. Correct answer, B. Number 15, give one reason why it is important for scientific reports to include a referencing section. Here were your three possible responses here. So to enable readers to track down sources, that was probably the most common response, to give credit and to avoid plagiarism. So this question on the whole was answered reasonably well. Most students achieved that 1 mark, which was good. But a lot of people said some bizarre things. For example, says that it's important because it allows us to check the validity of the study. But that's not what a referencing section does. That's not why sources are cited. So that was lacking a bit of clarity there. All right, question number 16 to 26 was all in relation to this study here, where the researcher was finding out whether team activity or independent physical exercise had any impact on happiness. So the following questions were all in relation to this, which tells us that this is sorry, that was a cat walking over the screen, that this is AO2. And therefore, most of the questions that follow are going to require application back to this study. Okay, so question number 16, which of the following is correct? Group A and B are the conditions of the dependent variable. Nope. Groups A and B are the conditions of the independent variable, and happiness is the dependent variable. This is B, our correct answer here. Most of you, I think in fact all of you got this one correct. All right, question number 17. Would a directional or non-directional hypothesis be more suitable? You get 1 mark for saying non-directional, and then you get 1 mark for saying because there was no previous evidence available. So if we just go back to our scenario, he could not find any published research on this. That tells us that we're not aware of the effect that the IV is going to have on the DV, so therefore we have to use a null hypothesis. Remember, we use a non-directional. We only use a directional hypothesis when previous research has been published, which suggests the effect the IV is going to have on the DV, and it's conclusive. So it's worth, if you didn't get this one right, reviewing your notes on types of hypotheses and when we do and don't use them. So unfortunately with this question, quite a few people said directional because they said some strange answers like, I don't really know, that it was appropriate because they were trying to find a difference rather than a correlation. It didn't make sense, but I saw that far too often, unfortunately. All right, question number 18. Write a suitable hypothesis for this experiment. This relied on you getting the answer to the previous question correct. So here we're looking for a non-directional hypothesis. Unfortunately, if you got number 17 wrong, then it was 0 marks if you wrote a directional. You could have written a null, nobody did, but that was credit worthy as well. So for 3 marks, you needed to operationalise your IV and your DV. Most people got 2 marks for this one because they didn't fully operationalise their IV. So didn't fully operationalise their DV. So the DV is the improvement in happiness score. Most of you just said happiness score. And so unfortunately, you only operationalized one variable and therefore got a maximum of 2 marks. But the structure was good. Most people understand how to word a hypothesis. They just didn't operationalize their DV. All right, question number 19. Identify the type of sampling method used in this study and explain one limitation of this sampling method in this study. So you got 1 mark here for correctly stating an opportunity sample, and then you got 2 marks if you explained a limitation of opportunity sampling in the context of this particular study. So let's have a look at this possible content here. A lot of you did say, yes, it could create a biased sample that is unrepresentative and could create issues with generalizability. But that was vague and generic and just one of those copy and paste statements that wasn't actually applied to this study. So you needed to look at exactly how the researcher sampled these participants and how that might have an effect on the DV. Why is this a problem for this study? For example, the researcher selected students who were at the cafe. They might have been more social, more outgoing, more confident, and therefore might enjoy team sports. That means that those participants, if they were taking part in team sports, are going to report higher levels of happiness than other people who weren't at that cafe at that time because they were introverts. And so that is saying directly how opportunity sampling in this study is going to have a direct impact on the dependent variable. So a lot of people just got 2 marks for this, 1 for saying opportunity sampling and then 1 for giving a generic limitation of opportunity sampling, but it needed to be contextualized. Okay, number 20, identify 1 variable on which participants should be matched in this matched pairs design. I was so pleased to see so many of you get full marks for this because you followed the procedure that we looked at in the first week of this term. So 1 variable could have been personality. Some of you said introversion, extroversion, prior levels of happiness, type of sport they usually play, or fitness. Because all of these are going to have a direct effect on the DV, which is happiness as a result of doing sport. So you got 1 mark for identifying that appropriate variable to match participants on. A lot of you didn't actually explain how that matching was going to happen. So you didn't mention that there was going to be some sort of pre-test, a questionnaire assessing their type of happiness or personality, or some sort of fitness test, for example. And then many people didn't actually explain how the matching process would happen. So the 2 people who report the highest levels of happiness will be paired, the next 2 highest levels of happiness will be paired together, and so on and so forth until all participants are paired. And then 1 member of each pair will be randomly allocated to the independent sport condition and the other to the group sport condition. So for 4 marks, you needed to remember the process and outline every step in that process of matched pairs designs. All right, number 21, explain 1 strength of using a matched pairs design rather than a repeated measures. I was shocked by this question. So many people said it helps to reduce participant variables. No. This is in comparison to a repeated measures design, where there are literally no participant variables because it's the same people taking part in both conditions. Yes, it does help to minimize participant variables, but not in comparison to repeated measures. And so unfortunately, if you said that, you got 0 marks. Some things that were credit-worthy was, fewer order effects because participants were only completing 1 condition rather than both. Some of you said demand characteristics for the same reason, that you're only aware of 1 condition of the study and therefore less likely to respond to demand characteristics, etc. Just 1 note of caution here about the time. A lot of you said matched pairs is a lot quicker or less time consuming than a repeated measures because you can run both conditions simultaneously. That's true. That is fine. However, a matched pairs design is also very time consuming because you have to do the pre-test, then you have to do the matching, then you have to do the random allocation. And that actually does take quite a bit of time to do. And so I would caution you against just mentioning time without that further elaboration. You need to understand the nuance that it's not just as simple as saying matched pairs is quicker than repeated measures. You need to qualify it. Question number 21, calculate the value of S in this study and show your workings. Many of you need to review your notes and the videos on the sign test. So in the sign test, what we're always trying to do is add up the number of improvements from time A to time B, and the number of people who decrease in terms of level of happiness. So I would try and do this as systematically as possible and go through the table and actually tally this up. So pair 1, a decrease. Pair 2, an increase. Pair 3, there was no change, and so we're going to strike them from our data. Pair 4, I don't know why I've done that. Pair 5, also no change, so we're going to strike them from our data. Pair 6, increase. Pair 7, increase. Pair 8, increase. Pair 9, decrease. And pair 10, increase. Right, here we've got 5 who increased and 3 who decreased levels of happiness. So our smallest number is 3, and therefore S equals 3. Okay. So then explain whether or not there was a significant difference in the improvement in the scores between the two groups. Here it's absolutely essential that you're able to read the values from a critical values table. I was very surprised that some of you were unable to do this. So let's just take a look at how we go about doing that. So the first thing that we need to do is calculate our number of participants. If we just go back, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We had 10, but we're striking 2 pairs out of here because they recorded no change in their results. So n equals 8. That is crucial. So here we are. We're looking at a level of significance at 0.05, which is standard. So unless you're told otherwise, you can assume that that's the level of significance that we're looking at. A two-tailed test, although you didn't actually need to do anything with that, you were told and you were only given two-tailed as an option. So let's have a look at n equals 8 and p equals 0.5. There we go. There is our critical value. We saw before that our calculated value of S was equal to 3. And now let's have a look at our rule here. Significance is shown is that the calculated value of S, 3, is equal to or less than the critical value. In this case, 3 is not equal to or less than the critical value, so therefore it is not significant. Again, if this just fills you with dread and anxiety, it's worthwhile going back and looking at your notes on how to read and interpret significance from a critical values table. All right, question 24. Explain what it means for a test to have high concurrent validity. So many of you got 1 mark for this one because you gave sort of a general description of concurrent validity, where there's close agreement between the data or the results produced by the new test compared to an established test. That was enough to get you 1, but for elaboration, you then needed to talk about a correlation coefficient. What do we mean similarity? At what level are we going to accept that the data is similar enough or that there's close enough agreement? So we're looking at a correlation coefficient of plus 0.8 or higher. So you needed both of those points for 2 marks there. Question number 25. This questionnaire had high concurrent validity. However, validity was still a concern because the researcher knew which participants were in each experimental group. Explain how this could have affected the validity of the study. So, of this study, AO2, we're not just talking about experimental effects generally. We need to explain in this study exactly how that could have happened. So, most people did this well. Most people embedded their answers fully into the STEM material, so you did actually use the scenario to explain how investigator effects may have occurred, but sort of less able students that were getting just 1 or 2 marks gave really generic responses about investigator effects or researcher bias. So you need to absolutely apply effectively when requested. So here, the fact that the experimenter knew who was in each condition could lead to investigator effects. And then we've got some specific examples of how this might impact on our DV. How might this create an extraneous or potentially confounding variable? For example, the researcher may have unconsciously or consciously influenced the responses given by participants. They might have smiled more or less for one group than another while they were answering the happiness questionnaire. This meant that participants would then rate themselves as happier if they were put in a more positive mood by the researcher, and therefore this is going to have a direct effect on the DV, which means that it's going to be hard to draw conclusions about the effect of team sport or independent exercise on happiness when we've now got a confounding variable of our investigator effects that is also influencing the happiness of participants. So you didn't need to say every single one of these points. It was a banded question. It was just how well you were able to explain how investigator effects could have affected validity in this study. So you absolutely need to apply to the scenario. The most common mistake with this question was to focus on researcher bias when allocating students into their groups, but that wasn't appropriate in the context of this study. We're assuming that allocation in a matched pairs design has already happened, as you explained, many questions prior, and so that wasn't relevant. You had to assume that allocation had already happened. All right, question number 26. So, using your answer to number 25, suggest one way in which the researcher could modify the study to improve the internal validity of this study. Justify your answer and apply to the scenario. So, for 4 questions here, 4 marks here, you needed to explain your modification and then justify why and how it was exactly going to improve. So, you need to say something like, they would use a double-blind procedure, so the investigators and the subjects don't know which condition they've been allocated to. This could be done by using a research assistant to conduct the experiment and to issue the questionnaires to participants, and this person would be blind to the conditions of the research. And you could say that they could do it in a different room without the researcher there, so therefore the researcher's behaviour couldn't unconsciously influence participants' responses, etc. So there were lots of things that you could have said for this one, but it was absolutely crucial that you applied to the scenario. So think about modifications to this study and think, in this study, how is a double blind going to be sufficient or relevant in terms of reducing investigator effects and improving the validity. In the real 2019 papers, this question, all students actually got 4 marks because internal validity is not listed on the specification. But you know about internal validity, you should be talking about it confidently, so I marked this out of 4 still. I didn't give everybody full marks. All right, and number 27, suggest an appropriate statistical test. I was surprised how many people just skipped this question altogether. There's 4 things that you need to include. 1 for identifying the suitable statistical test, 1 for saying it was a test of difference. This was the point that most people missed out. 1 for saying that it is an independent groups design, and 1 for saying that the level of measurement was ordinal. A number of you said interval or nominal, and so you picked the wrong test as a result. So really important that you do lots of work being able to accurately identify the appropriate statistical test. We'll do plenty of work between now and summer on helping you to select the right tests. Number 28, the designer study questions will be in the next video.